A week ago tonight, President Obama went before a joint session of Congress and called on lawmakers to pass the American Jobs Act right away, right now. Today, in a speech to the Economic Club of Washington, House Speaker John Boehner finally gave his fullest response to date.
Some of the president's proposals, I think, offer an opportunity for common ground. But let's be honest with ourselves. The president's proposals are a poor substitute for the pro-growth policies that are needed to remove barriers to job creation in America.
Boehner laid out the country's economic problems as he sees them.
The situation was created by Washington's inability to let our economy work. It was created by government intrusion and micromanagement. Job creators in America basically are on strike. They've been slammed by uncertainty from the constant threat of new taxes, out-of-control spending, and unnecessary regulation.
Not surprisingly, Boehner listed one of the government threats to job creation as, of course, taxes. But this time, he's talking about tax cuts.
It strikes me as odd that at a time when it's clear the tax code needs to be fundamentally reformed, the first instinct to come out of Washington is to come up with a new host of tax credits that make the tax code more complex.
President Obama has proposed a $4,000 tax credit to businesses who hire people who have been out of work for 6 months or more. And speaking of the president's American Jobs Act, one House Republican has responded with his own legislation with the same title as the president's American Jobs Act of 2011. Here it is. It was introduced by Texas Republican Louis Gohmert. It's exactly 2 pages long. Proposes only one thing: cutting the corporate tax rate to 0. Joining me now are Ezra Klein, Washington Post columnist and MSNBC contributor, and Bruce Bartlett, former senior policy analyst in the Reagan White House and Deputy Assistant Secretary at Treasury. He is now a columnist for the Fiscal Times and a contributor for the New York Times. Thank you both for joining me tonight.
Good evening.
Bruce, I'm struck by this bill, this Republican bill, to cut the corporate tax rate to 0, because as I've been listening to Republicans these many months, it seems that the argument behind everything they're saying would lead to virtually all tax rates to go to 0. I can't figure out what they think the optimum tax rate is. Is there a tax rate that's too low?
Well, I think we're already at rates that are really too low to raise the revenue the government needs. But you're absolutely right. I've never once in my life heard a Republican say that a tax cut was too large, or tax rates, cutting rates to some level such as 0 is too much. And you're right. Implicitly, they believe tax rates should be 0.
Ezra, was the speaker still making that phrase about common ground? But what common ground, after the speaker's speech today, what common ground was left between the president and the Republicans in the House?
Not a ton. And what struck me, though, was there wasn't actually all that much common ground left between John Boehner and the economy today. I went through the speech shortly after it was given, and I looked for some of the words that weren't there. And remember, this speech was about why the economy is not working out, why we are still at 9% unemployment. It never mentioned Wall Street, never mentioned foreclosures, negative equity, household debt, emerging markets, European debt crisis, demand. It never mentioned demand. It mentioned only one thing as a cause of our problems, which was government, and that was how you got to a solution, which was only one thing, which was less government, less regulation, lower taxes. That's sort of fine as a political document, but doesn't really give you a roadmap for understanding the crisis that we're in. Liberals get tagged a lot for believing the government can solve all of our problems, but conservatives can be a mirror image of that sometimes, and Boehner was today, in which they believe government is the sole cause of all our problems. And that ain't right either.
Bruce, how do Republicans explain, or do they bother to explain, how the golden age of Reagan had a corporate tax rate that was higher than the corporate tax rate is now, or was under Bill Clinton?
Well, really, the substance of the Reagan years has been whitewashed from the Republican memory. Remember, the top tax rate was 50% on individuals up until 1986. Among the things that Reagan did in the '86 tax reform was to raise the capital gains tax to 28%. The top 1% of taxpayers paid a third of their income in federal taxes during Reagan's administration. And now it's down to about 10 percentage points less. It's dropped by about a third. And economists are increasingly focusing on the fact that a lot of the negative trends that things that we're dealing with in the economy today really seem to have started about 10 years ago. I don't know what happened 10 years ago that would have caused anything to change, though.
Ezra, the Speaker of the House formally ruled out any possibility of the pay-for side of the Obama jobs bill, which is the taxation part of it, the increases in tax revenue due to adjustments to deductibility issues for the top taxpayers. Where does the Obama bill go from here if the Speaker is basically saying, we won't give you any of that tax revenue that pays for it?
Maybe it doesn't get paid for, or maybe it goes nowhere at all. You know, it was fascinating, though. It seemed to me to be a major break in administration strategy. When they released those pay-fors, as you mentioned, every single one of them was on the tax side. Every single one of them were things Republicans and, to some degree, some Senate moderate Democrats had rejected in the past couple of years. And it was striking because, for the first time, the administration didn't end up offering the compromise at the beginning. They said, we're going to give you a popular-seeming jobs bill. We're going to only tie ourselves to popular tax increases on the rich. And if you want to oppose us on that, we're happy to beat you over the head for a while with the fact that you refuse to spend money on the jobless by raising taxes on the rich. So where it leaves the bill is in a political place that the bill in some ways was always going to end up in, which is whether or not Obama can leverage what they believe to be a popular package and create enough public pressure on the Republicans that they break and at least let some or most of it through.
Bruce, what is your sense of what the political dynamics are for the Republicans on the Hill on this? Are they at some point going to feel the pressure to come up with something more than Louis Gohmert's one-pager on eliminate the corporate tax as their only proposal for job creation legislatively?
Well, I think over the last week, you did see some cautious movement in the direction of supporting the president's jobs bill. But I think that came to a screeching halt the moment he put out his pay-fors. And as Ezra pointed out, they were all tax increases. It was almost as if Obama was waving a red flag in their faces, just daring them to come out against it. And they obliged him by doing so. Frankly, I have to question the president's political judgment in being so in the face of the Republicans by putting forward these pay-fors that he had to know, and everybody knew, they would absolutely reject categorically.
Ezra, as Bruce and anyone who's worked on legislation knows, the pay-for side is that's the killer. That's the part that is very, very hard to get either right politically or in policy terms. What alternatives, what pay-for alternatives did the president have that he could possibly have chosen that would have both made sense to his party and had a chance with Republicans?
There's probably not a lot that would have a chance in the broad sense. So right now we are in a situation where the super committee needs to come up with about $1.5 trillion or so in pay-fors on its own before you get to the extra $450 billion for this package. So what you would need to do in order to get Republicans on board is you would need to add $450 billion in spending cuts, somehow very concrete spending cuts over 10 years. You can do that. You can dig into Medicare. You can dig into Medicaid. You can dig into Social Security. You can dig into defense. There isn't a whole lot more at this point we can do in non-discretionary, non-defense discretionary spending. That would have been harder with his party, but the question that the White House began to ask is, well, are Republicans really going to come on board for that either? Because obviously there's always been this deal on the table, a $4 trillion deficit deal, which is what Boehner and Obama were discussing before the negotiations broke down. That's larger than what the super committee needs to do, but Republicans have not really been willing to say yes. So the new theory was, instead of offering up a compromise, that they will say no to it, and now you'll be yoked to unpopular compromise policies, which maybe Republicans Republicans will simply try to pass on their own later, come out with something you can sell politically in the hopes that will either increase pressure on Republicans, or if it doesn't do that, let's be honest about the strategy here, help get you reelected.
Now, the Republican chant about why the economy is so bad is that too much taxation, and they ignore that we've had much higher levels of taxation in the past with much stronger economies. And then also, of course, regulation. Regulation is just drowning this economy and tying it up in knots and making everything immovable in this economy. Let's listen to what Speaker Boehner said today, specifically about regulation and how that's going to be the second prong in the Republican attack on how to fix this economy, cut taxation and cut regulation. Let's listen to what he said about regulation.
We all know some regulations are needed. There are reasonable regulations that protect our children and keep our environment clean. Well, then there are excessive regulations that unnecessarily increase the cost for consumers and small businesses.
Well, at least he's one of the Republicans who admits that we need some regulation. There are those out there who don't even grant that. But, Bruce, what is the empirical evidence? What do we know about what regulation does to the economy? What is the negative drag on the economy from regulation?
Well, look, government regulation is imposes a large cost on the economy. But to make the argument that regulations are what's holding us back today as opposed to some other thing, you'd have to show that there's been a significant increase in regulation just since 2008. And there's absolutely no evidence of that. In fact, if you look at the surveys by the National Federation of Independent Business, they show that the burden of regulation is less than it was back in the 1990s when the economy was booming. So I think what Republicans are doing here is simply using the poor state of the economy as an excuse to pursue the agenda that they pursue year in, year out, which is they always want to deregulate the economy and set the businessman loose. But there's absolutely no evidence that this will do any good.
Thank you both. Ezra Klein of MSNBC and the Washington Post, and Bruce Bartlett, formerly of the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you.